This is a question I get asked a lot, and it's a question that it's relatively easy for me to answer. The answer for that to me out of the gate is humility, right? The most important quality for a leader to have is humility. And the reason I say it's a pretty easy answer for me to give is because when I was my last few years in the SEAL teams, I was running the advanced SEAL training where SEAL platoons are preparing to go overseas in combat. And I was training the young SEAL leaders on how to lead. And when we would have to fire a SEAL leader from a leadership position, we would fire that SEAL leader not because they didn't know how to uh, shoot a gun, not because they didn't know how to work a radio, not because they didn't know how to read a map and compass, not because they weren't in good physical condition. When we would fire a SEAL leader, the vast majority of the time, the SEAL leader would get fired because they lacked humility. Because when someone lacks humility, they think they know everything. They don't listen to anybody else. They don't take any input. They don't evolve. And so we have to have that's like the number one quality for a leader to have, in my opinion, is humility. Now, listen, there has to be that humility has to be balanced with a
This
drive.
is the Business of Advice podcast, where we help good advisors become great business owners. Today, I am honored to be joined by a guest whose name is synonymous with leadership, discipline, and resilience, and who is also an American hero, retired Navy SEAL officer, and best-selling author of the iconic book, Extreme Ownership, Jocko Willink. Jocko is an inspiration to just countless individuals. He's known for his unmatched self-discipline, which I'm sure we're going to talk about, and the motivational mantra, discipline equals freedom. I'm also excited to announce part of why we have him on here is he is going to be one of our featured trainers at the AE Leadership Summit in San Diego at the end of the year. So today will be a bit of a sneak peek of that. But Jocko, thank you for making the time. And more importantly, thank you for your service to our country.
Well, it was an honor to be able to serve. I'd do it all again if called. And thanks for having me on. I appreciate it.
Yeah, excited. I told you we've been trying to get you an event for a while, so I'm glad we finally lined it up. And we had to come to San Diego to make it easy for you to say yes. So, but I know our advisors are going to be excited about it too. There was a buzz when we announced it, so excited to be out there with you.
It's awesome. Looking forward to it.
That's I want to cover a bunch of stuff with you. You know, so much of this podcast is focused on how do we grow and develop as leaders, but let's maybe just start with the concept that I would say seemed to, at least from the outside looking in, really accelerate you into the mainstream, and that was the book Extreme Ownership. So first off, I guess I'd ask, like, when you wrote that book, did you have any idea it was going to become what it's become? Hey everyone, sorry to take you away from the video. If you find this video helpful, make sure to hit the subscribe button for more insights. Also, hit the notification bell so you never miss an update, and share this with someone who might benefit. Remember, the world needs great leaders more than ever before, so go be great. Now let's jump back into this episode of The Business of Advice.
No, I definitely didn't have any idea it was going to become what it became. And part of that was the fact that, the publisher, I had a good relationship and have a good relationship with my publisher, but the guy that actually my editor who was talking, I didn't even know what a successful book was. I didn't understand what that meant. I didn't understand if we could predict if it would be successful or not. And one of the things he told Leif and I, who Leif wrote the book with me, he said, listen, if you guys, if you sell 20,000 copies, that's like a great hit, and we'll be, that's a winner. And we, I said, okay, that makes sense. And I said, well, how do you think it's going to do? And this guy's been in publishing for 25 years. And he shrugged his shoulders and he said, the only thing that knows what the public is going to like is the public. And we've had books, and he explained that he had books that everyone thought they print millions of copies, or at least hundreds of thousands of copies of these books. And then they end up not selling. He said he had a book that Oprah Winfrey, during the height of the Oprah Winfrey show, was shaking the book at the camera and saying, you got to buy this book. And they sold like 1,000 or 2,000 copies or something like that. And so it's very difficult to predict. And so I had no idea that the book was going to do as well as it's done and as it's continued to do.
Yeah, I feel like there's a few of those every 5 years. that just take. I feel like that was one, James Clear's Atomic Habits. Like those seem like those books that have just skyrocketed. Yeah, I wasn't going to ask you this question, but like, is there anything that you can pinpoint as you look back on it? Like, why has it done as well as it's done?
To the best of my understanding, and as I look at it, I think the reason that the book has done so well is because it's right, is because it's true. And I think that when people hear the truth, they know it and they tell their friends about it.
Mm.
And I think that's what happened. I mean, look, the concept of extreme ownership is something that you got from your mom and dad in,
Yeah.
fourth grade, or your sixth grade school teacher said, you got to be accountable for your actions, right? We've all heard that before. And the reason we've all heard it before is because it's true. And even those fundamental laws of combat leadership, cover, move, simple, prioritize and execute, decentralized command, these are things that they truly work in leadership. And I think maybe we were able to explain them in a way that made them very clear to people. But I think the reason that the book has been successful is because the book is true. And if you apply the principles that are in the book, they will help you in every aspect of your life.
Well, and like you said, I had so many friends, who sent me the book or reached out and they're like, man, you got to check out this book. So it was that word of mouth. I think when people read it, it's like, man, this is good stuff. You hit a few of those principles, but would you maybe share one? I'm assuming most of the people who are listening to this podcast have probably already read the book. If not, they should go pick it up. But would you just share maybe a few of the core principles of like extreme ownership that you feel maybe resonated most with I'm going to say like the business entrepreneur community, and just how people should think about how to apply those principles to lead their teams effectively? Don't really have to hit them all, but just maybe if there's two or three that you think have stood out the most to people.
Yeah, and really, I just kind of blurted them out really quick. And
Yeah.
the thing to remember is, well, the thing that I always that's kind of interesting about this whole unfolding of these principles is these principles are not principles that I made up, right? These are principles not from just like the Battle of Ramadi, but these are principles from the history of warfare.
Yeah.
And so I didn't make anything up. I kind of took these lessons and we used them, and then I taught them. And I taught them inside the military. And then when I got out of the military and I began teaching these principles to civilian companies, now these principles have been used in every different industry that there is, from manufacturing and insurance, construction, energy, entertainment, software, tech, like the whole nine yards. These laws of combat, they work. And again, are they groundbreaking? No, they're not. They're not groundbreaking. Cover, move, the first law of combat leadership is just teamwork. That's what it means. Take care of your teammates. Keep it simple. We've heard that our whole lives. Keep things simple. Prioritize and execute. Well, you got to focus on the right things. How many times have you been told, hey, you got to focus on the right things? That's what prioritize and execute is. And decentralized command, empower your subordinate leadership, right? That is a tenet of leadership that goes back throughout history. You've got to empower your subordinate leadership. And then finally, the idea of extreme ownership, which, like I said, I mean, we all got taught that in fourth grade or fifth grade. And the idea of actually taking responsibility and ownership for what occurs in your world is sort of the beginning of enlightenment. So they work on the battlefield, they work in business, and they work in life.
Yeah. Did you see any transition as you transitioned, so let's say out of military more to, obviously speak a lot in the corporate world now, were there any challenges you faced during that transition, or how to make sure people understood how to apply these in more of a corporate setting?
Well, the big thing is that we had to overcome, and still have to overcome to a certain extent, is the stereotypical image that people have of military leadership, right? Because people think of military leadership and they think of, a leader standing up and barking orders at people, and everyone just obeys their orders because they don't want to get in trouble. And, the way I look doesn't really help me soften that stereotype very much, because I kind of look like a stereotypical military person. But the fact of the matter is that type of leadership, even though it exists in the military, and it exists in the civilian sector as well. I mean, I always ask, who here's had a boss that's yelled and screamed at him? Who here's had a boss that was arrogant? Who here's had a boss that was my way or the highway? We've all had bosses like that. They exist in the civilian sector. They exist in the military. but it's not good leadership.
Mm-hmm.
And even though it might work in the short term, if you work for me, Cody, and I say, Cody, you better get this report done to me now. Like, you're going to do it, right? You don't want to get fired today. You want to collect your paycheck, but you're certainly not going to give me your best effort. And you're probably put your resume into other places.
Mm-hmm.
So the biggest, I would say, obstacle in the transition from the military to the civilian sector was just overcoming the stereotype that people have. People think that the military is closed-minded and authoritarian, but really good military leaders are open-minded and very collaborative.
That's good. So talk about this idea of team. I think one of the things you talk about in there is there are no bad teams, only bad leaders. Can you maybe share examples of that you've seen? Going back to what you just said, right? Through force, at times you can get people to do what you want, but like keeping those people around is probably going to be tough. So many of the entrepreneurs, the advisors we work with, is they're growing their team. I don't know how to say this any different than sometimes that's a new skill they have to learn, because so much of it, they were probably in a sales role. Now they're building a bigger team, and they've got to figure out how to be a good leader of a good team. A lot of times I think they blame the team. I shouldn't say ours. I feel like they do a pretty good job, but generally speaking, people a lot of times blame the team and don't look at the leader. So just any examples you'd say of, like, as the leader, how do you step forward to make sure that you're not blaming the team and that going back to what you talked about, that you own that kind of outcome?
Yeah, and really, it's not just your industry where this happens, right?
Yeah.
You've got a
Yeah.
good salesperson. Okay, I've got a great salesperson working for me. I'm going to make him sales manager. Well, guess what? Someone that's, an iron worker, someone that works hard and does a good job tying iron down in the construction site, they get promoted
Yep.
to leader. And it happens in every industry. We take our best performers and we turn them into leaders. And oftentimes we give them no leadership training whatsoever. We just assume they're going to figure it out. On the job, they'll figure it out. And obviously we know that doesn't work very well. You have to, and that's one of the reasons why Echelon Front, my leadership
Yeah.
consulting company, that's why it exists, because we teach leadership. And a lot of people don't recognize that leadership is a skill, right? A lot of people think that you're just born with leadership.
Mm-hmm.
You're born with those leadership qualities, and you either have them or you don't. Well, that's just not true. There are some leadership qualities that you can be born with. For instance, if someone here's a real basic one. Loud voice, right? Having a loud voice is very important in leadership, especially in combat leadership, because
Yeah.
if people can't hear you, they can't do what you say. And having a loud voice is a genetic quality that you get. And the reason that I know that is because I got 4 kids. And if you heard how loud it was around my dinner table when my kids were young, like, having a loud voice is a good leadership quality. And you are born with that. And maybe you're born with a loud voice. That's great. Maybe you're not. But just like being, 6'9" playing basketball, if you're 6'9", you got a gift. You've got some special things that will make it easier for you to get good at basketball. But if you take a guy that is 6'9" and he never practices, he never learns how to dribble, never learns how to take a jump shot, never learns how to shoot a layup, he's not going to be able to get on the court and make a difference. So leadership is a skill that people have to learn. And it's very difficult when people don't even recognize that. And then what happens, to get to your question, you take someone and you put them in charge of a team, and since they don't have leadership skills, they can't make leadership layups, they can't make leadership jump shots, they can't leadership dribble. They're lost out there on the leadership court, and things start to go bad. And what do? They get mad at their team. Why didn't my team do this right? Why didn't my team do a better job? Why is my team slacking like this? Well, the fact of the matter is, it's your team. It's your team, and the team is a reflection of the leader. The team is the leader of the team is the person that brings people on board, recruits those people, brings them on board, trains them, gives them direction, mentors them, gives them the strategies and tactics that they're going to execute to accomplish the mission. That is all on the leader. And by the way, also, if you have somebody that's a terrible performer, that's a negative impact to the team, well, the leader is also in charge of either getting that person up to speed or getting rid of them. So it's like the most obvious choice for a leader when something goes wrong. The easiest thing to do is point at the team and say the team is bad. But when that happens, it's very clear that the team is not what is bad. It is the leader that is subpar in their performance.
Yeah, especially if you're trying to say that the whole team is bad. But one of the things you were just hitting on there that I love about the book is the idea of, standards are what you tolerate as the leader. How do you recommend, like when you're training leaders, how do you help them maybe not even establish standards, right? They've kind of got to figure out what their standards are, what they want those to be. But then how would you go about telling a leader, like if someone's violating your standards or not meeting those, like how do you address and handle that? Because I
So
think that's a tough thing for a new leader, very specifically. Like when they come into that role, like having that tough conversation, and that's just something that I think a lot of them struggle with at times.
yeah, well, so we certainly have to set expectations, right? I can't hold you accountable, Cody, if I never told you that had an expectation that you were supposed to meet. For instance, like, hey, Cody, you know what? We got to show up on time. Like when we start a meeting, we're all in the meeting. We're on time for meetings. That's how we interact with each other, and that's also how we're going to interact with our clients. So that's one of our standards here. Don't be late. And you look at me and say, "Cool, got it." Now, a couple weeks later, you show up late to a meeting. What do I do? Do I jump down your throat? Do I write you up? Well, no, actually, I don't do that. What I do is I say, "Hey, Cody, I noticed you were late to the meeting today. Is everything okay?" Right? Because I don't know, you might have,
Yeah.
you might have a sick kid at home, you might have had a flat tire, whatever the case may be. I don't jump down your throat, and I let you know that I care about you because I'm saying, hey, Cody, is
Good.
everything okay? Now, I also let you know that I noticed that you were late, right? So there's a little bit of dual action occurring. I'm letting you know that I care, but I'm also letting you know that I care that you were late. And you might look at me and say, "Hey, Jocko, I'm sorry, I had a flat tire and it won't happen again." And I go, "Okay, great." And maybe you're never late again, or maybe you're late next week. And then what do I do? And this is what we call the escalation of counseling. I'm going to escalate a little bit. Hey, Cody, you were late again today. You were late last week. You understand? I do it. Is it clear to you? We have to be on time. That's the standard. Do you understand that? I want to make sure because we cannot be late. And you look at me and you say, "Hey, you know what? There was a construction site down the street. There was nails in the road. The flat tire last week. I got another one today. I swept up. It won't happen again. I'm sorry." And I say, "Great, cool." And maybe you're never late again. Or maybe you're late again next week. And if you're late again next week, what am I going to do? I'm going to escalate that a little bit more. And I'm going to say, "Hey, Cody, this is 3 times. I know you got things going on in your life. Everyone does. We cannot be late to meetings. And as a matter of fact, if you're late again, I'm actually going to have to write you up. I'm actually going to have to write you up. I don't want to write you up. You're doing a good job in all the other aspects, but you can't show up on time. That's a problem. So if you're late again, I am going to write you up. Do you understand what I'm saying to you?" And you go, "Yes, John, I get it. I'm sorry. I'm getting a second alarm clock. I won't be late again. You don't have to worry about me. I got this." And maybe you're never late again. Or maybe you're late next week. And then what am I going to do? I'm going to write you up. I'm going to tell you what your shortfalls are. I'm going to tell you what the corrective measures are you need to take. And I'm going to tell you what the consequences are if you don't take these corrective measures. And that's, and then I'll continue to escalate there. If
Yep.
hopefully it straightens you out. If it doesn't, then I'm actually going to execute the things that I told you I was going to execute. Now, all this being said, I need to make sure that I'm holding the standard on things that truly matter. And, there's some people, I have some pet peeve that, I only want this font in the presentations you give to me. And I write you up for that and I nag you about it. And then, I might be doing myself more harm than good as a leader because look, if you're performing, you're showing up on time, but you're using a different font that I like or some pet peeve that I have, that's actually not going to be the right thing to hold the standard on. So we as leaders have to figure out what are the important things, what do you need to hold the standard on, and what do I need to give you some leeway on? Because even, I like to get up and work out in the morning, show up early to work. There's some people that aren't morning people.
Yeah.
And they're going to stay late in the afternoon. They'd rather set their mornings at night and they'd rather stay after work and miss the traffic on the way home. So they're staying until 8 o'clock at night or 7 o'clock at night, but they're not coming in until 8:30 or 9 o'clock in the morning. And so what am I going to do? Do I actually try and understand them as a leader and say, "Well, hey, Cody, I noticed you're coming in like 9 o'clock in the morning. The rest of us here at 7:30, 8 o'clock." And you say, "Yeah, I like to drop my kids off at school every day and it really means a lot to me. And then I miss the traffic on the way home when I leave at around 6 or 7. So can we make that work?" Well, actually, yeah, we can, Cody. Appreciate it. Glad you got kids. Like, that's awesome. I used to like to give my kids a drop off at school if I could too. That's great. You see what I'm saying? So
Yeah.
figure out what's important and don't let your ego. Sometimes it's just my ego. My ego is saying that Cody better be here by 7:30. If Cody's not here at 8 like I am, he doesn't care. No, actually cares about his family.
Mm.
So those are some things to think about when it comes to having the hard conversations. And the final thing I'll say about the hard conversations, which is the actual question that you had, was the earlier you have the hard conversation, the easier it is. And as I just said, the first hard quote, air quotes, hard conversation I would have with you was, hey, I noticed you were late today. Is everything okay? That's not a hard conversation to
Yeah.
have.
Yep.
So the earlier you have a hard conversation, the easier it is going to be.
It's even when you phrase it like that, what goes through my mind is you're assuming the best about the person, right? You're not immediate, because I think a lot of times we tend to jump to the worst, possible outcome versus assuming the best. And if you assume the best, it makes that initial conversation a lot easier. I love that. Just the quicker you have it, the easier it is every step along the way. You said something, and I see this all the time. I mean, we're as guilty. I like to think we're better about it today than we used to be, but it's this idea of you tend to promote the best performer into the leadership role. Did the military do that, or did they have some other way that they would identify and promote leaders?
The military does the same thing as the
Okay. Yeah.
Cody, you've been here the longest. And actually, they don't always take the best performer. A lot of times it just has more to do with the time that you've been in a position.
Yeah.
So Cody, you've been here, you did that job, you did this job, now you're doing the next level up. And it's a very methodical promotional system.
So maybe even worse than corporate America.
It is. And actually what makes the military, I think one of the biggest problems with the military leadership is you get rotated out of a leadership position about every 2 years.
Mm.
And so, I'm your new leader. I show up into our platoon. And when I show up, you guys don't know anything about me. I came from, 1,000 miles away. So I came from overseas. I show up, the first 3-4 months, I'm playing a good role. I'm acting like I'm cool. And maybe you see me get arrogant a couple times, it takes you 3 or 4 or 5 months to realize, oh yeah, actually this guy's terrible. Or you're suspecting that I'm terrible. Then it takes you another 3 or 4 months to confirm that I'm terrible. And by the time you know I'm terrible, you haven't documented anything, of course, right?
Yep.
So you did. So now we got to start documenting things. Now we're far along in our pre-deployment training cycle. So now if you fire me, it's going to disrupt the whole platoon. It's going to bring unwanted attention to us. And so you go, you know what? He's not that bad. We'll just go on deployment with the guy. So now we all go on deployment. I'm a terrible leader. You are able to win because you got a good crew of people in the platoon. You're able to win and accomplish the mission despite my bad leadership. We come home because my platoon did such a good job. I get a good evaluation and I get promoted and I carry on. And that happens over and over again. So that's one of the reasons, you can kind of hold your breath with a bad leader in the military, you can kind of hold your breath. Whereas in the civilian sector, I mean, you take what you've done at Advisor Excel, you've been in this position for 20 years. You've been in a leadership position. And if you don't do a good job as a leader in the civilian sector, your company will fail or people will leave you as a leader. Whereas in the military, you can kind of breath hold. You can hang on for 2 years. I mean, you think about, you've been in business for 20 years. 2 years is a blip on the radar. Yeah. I mean, you have some big spikes where there might be more important time, but I'm sure there's a couple year periods where you're kind of on cruise control, and that happens. So that's one of the things I think with the military leadership, where sometimes people just get promoted because they've spent the time in rank and they did the minimal viable leadership performance and they still get promoted.
So let me ask a different question. And some of this would be as people are trying to move people into leadership roles, evaluate if they're doing a good job as a leader. Are there some traits that, and maybe it's in the military, but you do so much now in, let's say, the corporate world, just traits that you've identified like, man, these are the things that exceptional leaders have in common. And then on the flip side of that, are there any like immediate, like if you see this in someone who's in a leadership role, like, immediately, we can't keep this person in a leadership role?
Yeah. So this is a question I get asked a lot, and it's a question that it's relatively easy for me to answer. The answer for that to me out of the gate is humility, right? The most important quality for a leader to have is humility. And the reason I say it's a pretty easy answer for me to give is because when I was my last few years in the SEAL teams, I was running the advanced SEAL training where SEAL platoons are preparing to go overseas in combat. And I was training the young SEAL leaders on how to lead. And when we would have to fire a SEAL leader from a leadership position, we would fire that SEAL leader not because they didn't know how to uh, shoot a gun, not because they didn't know how to work a radio, not because they didn't know how to read a map and compass, not because they weren't in good physical condition. When we would fire a SEAL leader, the vast majority of the time, the SEAL leader would get fired because they lacked humility. Because when someone lacks humility, they think they know everything. They don't listen to anybody else. They don't take any input. They don't evolve. And so we have to have, that's like the number one quality for a leader to have, in my opinion, is humility. Now listen, there has to be that humility has to be balanced with a drive to be successful and a drive to win, of course. But that drive to win and the drive to be successful and really the drive to be the best, that has to be wrapped in a true sense of humility so that we have people that keep an open mind and they are open to new ideas, because closed-minded people that aren't open to new ideas, filled with arrogance, those are terrible leaders.
Bad combo.
They really are. Yeah.
That's good. No, I appreciate that. I I want to talk a little bit about change. I remember this was probably 7-8 years ago now. I got invited down to MacDill Air Force Base and got to go in and kind of see Central Command, what they were doing. And I remember one of the generals talking about how just warfare was changing, right? Back then, so much of the technology, drones, stuff like that. So I think we're seeing a lot of rapid changes. I think, right now specifically, everyone's talking about AI, how it's changing so many things. So in situations, maybe think back to your military time, when you see those types of like shifts, what are some of the ways that a leader helps maybe strategize that and then lead their team through that? Because I think it's common in every area of life that people oftentimes are resistant to change. So what would you advise someone? Because I think so many of our advisors even right now are looking at that, like with AI, new technology. How do you get your team on board with that? How do you strategize around where we should be focusing and then kind of navigate that whole area?
Yeah. So again, most important thing that we need to keep in mind is an open mind when it comes to new technology, and being humble and thinking, what, the way that I've always done this is not necessarily the way it's going to be the best way to do it in the future. And I've got some great examples of this. I this might date my age a little bit, but when I first came into the SEAL teams, we were just getting the first GPS, global positioning system. And it was about the size of a big, like a boot pair of shoebox, like a pair of boots shoebox. It was about that big, weighed about 25 pounds. And it took about 4 hours to find out where it was. So when you turned it on, it took about 4 hours on average, sometimes longer, sometimes less, but on average, 4 hours to figure out where it was. So I was the radio man, which made me the tech guy in my platoon. So that meant I was going to carry this 25-pound thing that took 4 hours to figure out where it was. And my first response was, I said, "Why do you want me to carry this?" I said, "I'll carry a map and compass. They weigh 4 ounces, and I'll tell you exactly where we are." And luckily, my boss at the time, explained some situations where that GPS was going to come in handy. For instance, if you're out at sea where there's no reference points, which is how you find yourself with a map and compass, this GPS could be critical. Or if you're out in the open desert where there's no reference points, this could become critical. And so, you know what? I started to use it, started to learn it, and I realized that it was a good tool. It didn't replace the ability to use a map and compass, but it was a good tool to know and to learn and to reinforce knowledge that I had. Now, as time went on, the GPSs got smaller and smaller. They got faster and faster. And right now, I mean, a GPS is infinitely faster and more accurate than a map and compass. And so the technology is going to evolve.
Yeah.
And it's going to evolve quickly. And so I think this is an important part for leaders to understand. You know, you mentioned change. And when change comes, people don't like change. And we as leaders make the mistake of touting change as if it is going to instantly make everything better. And this is something I learned early in my SEAL career. Change almost never instantly makes everything better. In fact, what happens when you change is it's almost guaranteed that your efficiency is going to decrease. That is almost guaranteed. You use a new system, a new technology, a new methodology. The first thing that's going to happen is we are going to get worse. We're going to get slower. We're going to become less efficient. And then as we begin to learn and understand the new technology and adjust the new technology and make changes to the protocols, then eventually we become more efficient. So it's important for us as leaders to make sure that we explain that, hey, we're going to use this new software tool and it is going to slow us down at first. However, fast forward in 6 months, we're going to have a bunch of data that we're going to have access to that we're now going to understand and we're now going to be able to make decisions off of, but that's going to take a little while. But we have to invest in it now. So I would say when it comes to change, make sure as a leader, you explain to people that we're going to become less efficient first. And the other thing you have to explain is this change that we're implementing is a draft. It is a rough draft. And I need your feedback. Cody, I need your feedback on this software because what I roll out to you is not going to be perfect. You're going to need to give me feedback. I'm going to get the feedback from all the other members of the team. We're going to make adjustments. We're going to hone that solution. We're going to get better and we're going to iterate over and over again until we become not just more efficient, but exponentially more efficient than we are right now. I think those things are important to think about from a leadership perspective when it comes to change, when it comes to technology.
That's good. I want to ask a follow-up question. I hope I can ask this question the right way. One of the things that I hear people say today, you know, even some of our people in leadership roles, and I would say generally it's a stereotype towards the younger generation, is maybe they lack some resiliency, like change freaks them out, higher levels of anxiety, some stuff like that. I kind of see it in the person more less than I do the generation, I guess I would say. But in your experience, like, are there some things that you can do to help your team or team members build more resiliency? I mean, specifically when you think about that idea of an environment constantly changing.
Yeah, I think this really boils down to, so what you're essentially talking about is leadership. You know, how can we as leaders help our team be more resilient? And to me, what this really boils down to is building a strong team. And to me, what building a strong team really boils down to is building good relationships with our people. Building good relationships with our people. And I've been saying that for years. And only a couple years ago, I was saying that, I was explaining this to a woman. I was speaking with a company and I was explaining to a woman, you know, hey, you need to build better relationships with the people on your team if you know, something was going on with the team. And she had a look on her face that was like a blank look. And I said, what do you think of when I say relationship? Like, what does that mean to you? And where it ended up was what a lot of people think a relationship is, hey, Cody, you work for me. Do you want, here's a cup of coffee. I got you a cup of coffee this morning. Hey, do you want to go get lunch next week? And we can sit down and, you know, you can ask about my kids and I'll ask about your kids. And then we'll be building a relationship. And that's what a lot of people think. But that's actually not truly building a relationship. And as I thought about this, I ended up breaking down what a relationship is into 5 different components: trust, listen, respect, influence, and care. And if we have those things, we will have relationships. So, and it's really easy to understand that when the inverse of that is easier to understand because Cody, If you don't trust me and I don't trust you, do we have a relationship? No.
Nope.
If you don't listen to me and I don't listen to you, do we have a relationship? No. If you don't respect me and I don't respect you, do we have a relationship? No. If you have no influence over me and I have no influence over you, do we have a relationship? No. And if I don't care about you and you don't care about me, do we have a relationship? No. Now, that being said, if I trust you and you trust me, if I listen to you and you listen to me, if I treat you with respect and you treat me with respect, if I have influence over you and you have influence over me and you care about me and I care about you, then we have a relationship. And if we have a strong relationship, we will be able to withstand more, right? Just like
Yep.
marriages fall apart, when finances go bad or some event occurs. If there's not a strong relationship, marriage will fall apart. Well, same thing happens with the team. We have a team and we get hit with some financial thing that we didn't expect. If we have a strong relationship, matter of fact, if we have a strong relationship, our relationship will get stronger. If we have a weak relationship, our relationship will fall apart. So then the question becomes, okay, Jocko, well, you want me to build a relationship. How do I do that with these 5 components? And the answer is, and this is counterintuitive, but in order to get these things, you have to give them. And the clearest example is, if Cody, if you're not listening to me, what do I do to make you listen to me?
Mm-hmm.
Do I just talk louder? No, I don't just talk louder. In fact, if I want you to listen to me, I need to listen to you. If I want you to trust me, I need to give you trust. If I want you to treat me with respect, I need to give you respect. If I want to have influence over you, I've got to allow you to influence me. And if I want you to care about me, I've got to care about you. So if we give those things and we allow them to grow over time, that's how we end up with a strong relationship. And when we have strong relationships, we're going to have more resilience as a team and as an organization. And this is the way it has always been. In a classic example, Band of Brothers. Have you ever seen the miniseries Band of Brothers? You've got Sorbel in the beginning, who treats his people bad and doesn't have a relationship with them. He yells and screams and doesn't listen to him. And they actually have a mutiny and get him fired. And then you have Dick Winters, who listens to his troops and cares about him, and they care about him and they take care of him. So this is World War II, the greatest generation. Guess what? Those troops didn't want to be treated bad, just like a millennial doesn't want to be treated bad, just like anyone in human history has not wanted to be treated poorly. They want to be listened to. They want to be treated with respect. And if you do that, and the same thing in the Vietnam War. There's a great documentary. It's called The World of Charlie Company. And it shows there's a captain that's in charge of Charlie Company in Vietnam. And he's this guy named Captain Jackson. He's a really nice guy. He listens to his team. He takes their input. He cares about them. He's doing all those things, and they just love this guy. And a new guy comes over and takes his position. It's a guy named Captain Rice, who the opening shot of Captain Rice, when he appears on the scene, he's like standing with his hands on his hips and his chest pushed out. And you can see he has a bigger ego. And he is one of those guys that it's my way or the highway, and he kind of barks orders. And it's interesting because as this documentary unfolds, eventually they get to a point where they've now been with Captain Rice for several months. And Captain Rice, they're talking to Captain Rice, and they say, what did you think about the transition? He goes, well, I think the guys just needed to learn who I was. And once they learned who I was and that, I meant business, they got on board with the way I do things. And then they cut to some of his troops that are out in the field. And the troops in the field are saying, they're like, oh yeah, we call on the radio and tell them that we're going out on patrol, but we don't ever go on patrol. We just sit here. And they're just completely disobeying what he's saying because they didn't respect him. And why didn't they respect him? He didn't respect them. So you want to have a strong team. You want to have a resilient team. Build strong relationships with your people.
That's good. Is there someone in your life that served as a mentor to you that really impacted you? And if so, was there like one key lesson that you learned from them?
Yeah. So there's really 2. One of them is a guy named Colonel David Hackworth, who is a guy that I never met, but he wrote a book called About Face, which was hugely influential to me. But there's another guy who I wrote about in a book called Leadership Strategy and Tactics. And he's a guy that I call DC in the book. And he was one of my platoon commanders at SEAL Team 1 when I guess I was 20, 21 years old. and he was a really experienced guy. He was kind of a legendary SEAL, and this legendary SEAL took over my platoon because we had a mutiny in our platoon and got our
Mm.
platoon commander fired. And when that happened, this guy DC came in and took over, and this legendary guy came and took over. And so in my mind, probably like everybody listening to this right now, when you think legendary SEAL, you think some 250 pound, 6'6", beast of a human being. Well, DC was probably 150 pounds soaking wet. He was probably about 5'5". And I remember the first time I saw him, I didn't think it could be this legendary guy, because this guy that I saw was this old, skinny, short guy. And by old, I mean he looked very old. He looked like he was at least like 36 or 37 years old, right? Well, when he took over that platoon, I learned why he was legendary. He was legendary because he was humble. And because of the things that I just talked about, he listened to us. He put trust in us. He treated us with respect. He truly cared about us. And that was what made him a legend. And that humble guy is the guy that I have tried to emulate until this day. So, yes, huge influence on me.
That's cool. So you're so well known for the idea of discipline equals freedom. I feel like, that's synonymous with you now. But is there, I'm going to ask this a little different way. Just curious how you answer it. Are there areas that you apply strict discipline in your life? Obviously, I see your 4:30 wake up call every day when you're working out. But then are there any areas where you do live more spontaneously?
Well, I mean, I have a rock and roll band, so I'm pretty
There you go.
spontaneous when I'm playing guitar and singing in rock and roll band. And like I was I was at a birthday party years ago for one of my kids, and it's someone else's kid, but I brought my kids, and as a friend of the family, and the ice cream cake came out, and I really like ice cream cake, and I cut a big piece of ice cream cake and I put it on my plate and I started eating it. And the grandma came over and she said, "Oh, Jocko, I thought discipline equaled freedom." And I said, "Well, yes, ma'am." I said, "This is the freedom part. This is the freedom part.
That's
I'm
good.
disciplined. I don't eat junk all the time, but when I'm at a party on a Saturday afternoon and there's a mint chocolate chip ice cream cake with Oreo crumbed bottom, I want to have that thing." And so that's why I have discipline in my life. So
Yeah.
when the time is right, I can have some freedom as well.
Let me ask a follow up. Is there, so maybe speak to the people that are listening to this, and let's say they're lacking some discipline in their life. Just say in general, right? Are there certain areas where you would tell people, like, hey, this is where discipline matters the most? Like, if you're going to start somewhere and you're going to focus on adding some discipline back into your life, like as a leader, if you discipline yourself here, it's going to have this waterfall effect into everything else that you do.
I think physical fitness is the most important thing.
Yeah.
I've heard that quote recently: a healthy person has 1,000 problems, a sick person only has one.
Mm.
So I think you really do have to make physical health the most important thing. And in order to have physical health and physical freedom, you got to have discipline. So waking up early and working out, exercising before you start the day, I think is an incredible way to move towards a more disciplined life. Because when you wake up early and you get the workout done, no one can take it away from you.
Hmm.
Because let's face it, I don't care who you are. I don't care who you are. I don't care how much money you have. If someone will crawl into, if you're planning to work out at 5 o'clock after work, there's no human being on the planet that can guarantee they're going to make that happen.
Hmm.
There's traffic, there's cars, there's water heaters, there's kids, there's, emails that are going to come in, there's problems with clients, there's all these things are going to happen. No human being can guarantee that they're going to be able to work out after work. But a lot of people can guarantee that if they wake up before emails start coming in, before the rest of their family is awake, they can get it done. So
Yeah.
I recommend, if you want to start to build some discipline in your life, wake up early and exercise.
That's good. So I want to ask some different questions, maybe than you're used to getting asked. But You have built now just a massive following, have become one of the most well known voices in leadership and discipline, have built this whole coaching and training and development company around that. As you look back on that journey of, I guess, call it building your brand and building your business, like, what were some of the most important steps you felt like you took to build that to where it is today? And then maybe any like key moments or lessons that you learned along the way of like building this business like you built it today?
I think the biggest lesson that I learned when it comes to building businesses is it's something that comes from military tactics. And the military tactics are, if you're going to attack the enemy, you don't put all your eggs in one basket. What you do is you probe the enemy to see where their areas of weakness are. And once you figure out where their areas of weakness are, so I send a reconnaissance out to 7 different locations. And when I send that reconnaissance out to 7 different locations, one of those locations or 2 of those locations doesn't meet any resistance. Well, then I'm going to send more resources into those areas. And that's what I'm going to, and I hate to use this term, but that's the area I'm going to exploit.
Yep.
Right? I'm going to exploit the enemy area of weakness. So what have I done from a business perspective is I've done that exact thing. I've sent out various reconnaissance and, for my leadership consulting company, I didn't buy a building and invest a bunch of money with employees to do contracting and run administrative support and set up our travel. I didn't do that. It was Leif and I started it, just the 2 of us. My supplement company, like, I didn't start by manufacturing an entire line of supplements and going into debt to make that happen. No, I started by making 1 supplement. My clothing company, I didn't start by having 4. I didn't invest tens of millions of dollars into building factories and hiring employees. No, we start off with a tiny factory in a timber frame factory in the woods of Maine. That's where we started. And now we have 4 factories that are, hundreds of thousands of square feet. But it was by testing the waters and listening to the feedback, because there's some people where they don't listen to the feedback that they get. They come up with a product and they think the product is great. The public, going back to what we talked about earlier, the only element that can judge whether the public likes a product or not is the public. That's the only group that can tell you what the public likes is the public. So you have to kind of test the waters. And then if you find something and you find an area that, again, this is why I hate to use the word exploit, but if you can find an area where there is a need and there's a high demand signal, then you can put more resources behind it. And if you find out that there's no demand signal, then you should not dump any more resources there. So that's essentially what I've done. And then on top of that, I've used the 4 laws of combat leadership that I've talked about, like decentralized command, right? I'm not on the floor of my factories. I'm not on the road every day teaching. I've got teams that do all this stuff. So decentralized command, really important. Cover and move, because there's times where I have to dive into one business. There's times when I got to dive into another business, and the team will cover for me when I got to do that. Prioritize and execute. Clearly, you've got things that are going to come up, and you got to figure out where you got to focus the resources and the efforts, and then keeping things simple. People got to know what the mission is. So those are the things that I've done to build businesses for the last 10, 15 years.
As you've built those businesses, have you found any like really key hire that has helped you a lot along the way? Meaning, like, is it someone that complemented what you were, maybe not as good at, or like, as you look back at those key hires, what were those?
Yep. Always. It's always finding people or at least building a complementary team. So, I've got certain skill sets and certain strong areas and certain weak areas. So I'm definitely going to find somebody that's going to be better at the areas of my weakness. But then that person will have some weaknesses, and we'll have to find somebody that's complementary to their weaknesses as well. So building a good, solid team with complementary strengths and weaknesses is absolutely critical. Otherwise, you can have blind spots that you're not going to be able to handle.
Yeah. Maybe if you want to give a little plug for the clothing company, I know we were talking about that before, what you're doing with that, which I think is super cool and people would love to hear. So you want to talk a little bit about just the concept behind what you're doing there?
Yeah, it's a company called Origin, and it's originusa.com. And what we've done is we've brought manufacturing back to America. So we've got 4 factories, 2 in Maine, 2 in North Carolina, and we We make everything. We make boots, t-shirts, jeans, hoodies, jujitsu gear, rash guards, workout gear, hunt gear. We make everything. And we make all those things that I just said with materials that are 100% sourced from America. So this is a standard that's unmatched by anybody else. Look, there's people that buy a bunch of material from overseas and have it sewn in Mexico and then assembled in America. There's a lot of people that do that. There's no one that's doing what we're doing, pure, true, from the dirt to the shirt, 100% American made. And this has been a huge thing for me because I grew up in New England. Manufacturing, textile and manufacturing was huge when I was a kid, and then it got sold overseas. And so we are bringing it back. We're rebuilding these communities, and we're rebuilding America's ability to manufacture.
That's cool. Well, like I told you, I think just the timing's pretty cool. You've been working on that, I know, for a while, but to see that just becoming such a thing in the news right now, or what everyone's talking about, you're positioned well for that. So final thing I'd ask you about, just kind of building your influence, I guess, is, great podcasts, you've written books, pretty active on social media, YouTube. Is there one of those things that you enjoy doing the most? And if so, why?
Yeah, of course. I like doing my podcast. That's great. I've gotten to interact with and become friends with a bunch of amazing people over the last almost 10 years that I've been doing the podcast. And so that's a huge thing. But I've written a bunch of kids' books, and I would say one of the most rewarding, if not the most rewarding thing in my life right now. My kids are all a little bit older now, from mid-20s down, but to have a 7 or 8 or 9-year-old kid come up to me and say, I read your book, I did my first pull-up 2 weeks ago, or I got an A in my math test, or I got 100%, or I learned the presidents in order, or the parents come up and tell me, hey, you know what, he was getting bullied, or he was having a hard time adjusting, or he wasn't doing well in school, and now he's squared away. So I think one of the most rewarding things for me is helping out kids and parents from that perspective. And of course, helping out leaders in all aspects. That's really essentially what everything is sort of rooted in, right? Everything is sort of rooted in these leadership principles, whether it's the clothing, whether it's the food supplements, whether it's the kids stuff, the kids books are getting turned into a movie. It's all grounded in the fact of like trying to help people out and pass on the lessons that I learned.
It's cool. So the last question I was going to ask you, then I wanted to jump into these quick lightning round questions, was about the kid stuff. So I bought my kids The Way of the Warrior Kid. Oh man, it feels like it was a long time ago. I don't know when you wrote that book, but my son's 20 now, so I feel like he was like, in his early teens when I bought that for him. But for parents, because a lot of parents are listening to this, like when they're working to instill values like discipline, hard work, those types of things in their children, any just like simple, real tips that you would give them quickly on like, hey, here's some things to do to instill those type of values in your kids?
Oh yeah, I got a massive one. It's probably one that most people wouldn't expect. Make things fun. Make things fun for your kid. This is something that I learned. I pushed my kids really hard when they were younger into jujitsu because I'm a jiu-jitsu practitioner. I love jiu-jitsu. It's a huge part of my life, and I wanted my kids to share that. And so I pushed them really hard, and I pushed them too hard. And it wasn't fun for them. And what you want, if you want somebody to engage in something, it's got to be fun, whether it's jiu-jitsu, whether it's school, whether it's chores, no matter what it is, you be a little bit creative and make the things fun. Cleaning up your room can be fun. Doing jujitsu or working out or studying, all these things can be fun if we frame them right, if we frame it right as parents. So if you want your kids to embrace good values, make those things fun.
That's good. And I would say if you have younger kids, buy his books. They're awesome. They were great for our kids to read. So love those. Okay, these are lightning round questions. It can be quick answers that I ask people here at the end. So 5 questions I want to hit you with. So this first one, I started asking this question after COVID because I think a lot of leaders had to like maybe reassess their thinking or things that they had thought, but that was 5 years ago now. So I'll ask this maybe in a slightly different way. Is there a recent lesson that you've learned that has impacted you in a big way when it comes to your leadership?
My automatic response to that is leadership is leadership. and and it doesn't matter what endeavor you're chasing after. It doesn't matter what group of people you're working with. Leadership is leadership. And the reason I say this is recent is because I learned this over and over and
Yep.
over again. I'll get introduced to some problem, some issue, some industry, and I'll say, wow, it is the exact same thing. So it's a lesson that I've learned and relearned over and over again.
Yeah, it's good. My buddy John Maxwell always says, it's just always stuck with me. He says everything rises and falls on leadership, right? And it's so true in everything. So okay, second question. What was the one thing that you did in your life that helped you transform from being a good leader to a great leader?
Well, I think first of all, I don't consider myself a great leader. I'm just a person still trying to learn. But I would say that the thing that helps you move in the right direction for me, the first step is recognizing that all these problems that I had in my world, all these problems I had with my team, all these problems I had with the project we were working on, all the problems I had with my family, all the problems that I had with my finances, all the problems I had with my health, all these problems, they're because of me.
Mm-hmm.
And the minute you say that, look, it's a heavy weight to bear, but now you own it and you can control it. And so don't blame other people. Don't blame other things. Take ownership.
I think, you said this at the beginning. I think that's why you said it well, but the book, I think, just resonated with people because it's almost freeing when you realize that, like, man, I can control this. And so that's good. Okay. Third question. Is there anything that you're doing this year to drive your personal growth and development? Maybe something new that you're excited about?
You heard this word intentionality. I heard this word getting thrown around a bit over the past few years, and
Mm-hmm.
it always kind of struck me as a woo woo kind of uh, spiritual, mindset type thing. But trying to keep an open mind, I heard it enough where I said, "Well, what do they mean by this?" And as I started asking people, like, "Well, what do you actually mean by that?" I didn't hear a really good definition, and so I made one up, or at least I made a thought process up around it. And if you think about what it means to be intentional, for me, it's something that I grew up doing in the military, which is come up with a plan, execute the plan, and then debrief. To me, that's what being intentional is.
Mm-hmm.
Come up with a plan. This is what I'm going to do. Now I'm going to go execute that plan. Once I get done executing, I'm going to do a debrief to figure out what I got right, what I got wrong, and what I can do better. And so I think that is the way that in a SEAL platoon you become good. That's how you become good. That's because every time you come up with a plan, you go and execute the mission. And when you come back, you debrief and you see what you can do better. You look for areas of weakness and you attack. And so that's what I learned to do in the SEAL teams. And that's what I continue to try and do, not just with my team, but with myself as well.
That's good. Okay, fourth question. If you could recommend one book to other leaders to read, and it can't be yours, what would you recommend?
About Face by Colonel David Hackworth. And
Yeah, I
again,
wrote that down.
yeah, it's not a book that is written with the intention of, hey, this is a book about leadership, but it's an 800 page book and it is all about leadership.
That's cool.
And so it is a incredible book, incredible life lessons. And I stole all kinds of stuff from Colonel David Hackworth. Like I literally stole like actual tactics and techniques that I used as a leader, stole 100% from
Hmm.
David Hackworth. So
That's
get that book.
that's good, and that's a new one, so people love that. Okay, final question. What is the best piece of advice you've ever received, and how's that influenced you?
When I was a new guy at SEAL Team 1 and I checked in, and the Master Chief, old Vietnam guy, said, keep your mouth shut, keep your ears open, don't forget any gear, don't be late. I stuck to that. I think it's a good piece of advice in all aspects. Keep
Yeah,
your mouth shut, keep your ears open, don't be late, and don't forget any gear.
be ready to go.
Yep.
That's good. Jocko, I truly appreciate the time today and really looking forward to seeing you in San Diego at our Leadership Summit at the end of the year. If our advisors, or I guess just anyone who's listening to this, want to follow along on your journey, some of the things that you're involved in, what's the best way for them to do that?
Yeah, I mean, I'm on social media, so it's at Jocko Willink on all the different social media type channels, and I've got a podcast that I do, and I've written a bunch of books. And if you dive into any of those things, you'll be a little bit more aware of what I'm talking about when we show up at the Leadership Summit right here in San Diego.
That's
So
right. Yeah.
I'm looking forward to meeting all you guys and going through this Leadership Summit. And I think there's going to be some things that people can take and apply to everything that they're doing.
That's great. And I said it earlier, but I'll say it again. Thank you for your service. Just so grateful for men and women like you, and just always want to honor that.
As I said earlier, when you said that to me, it truly was an honor to be able to serve.
Yeah.
Thank you.
It's great. Also, I'll just say for everyone who's listening, especially today, we're releasing this on the 4th of July. So go share this episode with other leaders you know. And remember, our world needs great leaders today more than ever. So work hard to go be great. Jocko, thank you.
Thanks for having me. Appreciate it.